Today I'm going to be making goat milk feta cheese. Actually, this video will stretch over the course of a few days, even over weeks, because it takes some time to make feta cheese. Feta has recently become one of my favorites to make because it has a long storage period. You'll find that it's a brined cheese, and so it keeps in its brine for really a year or even more possibly. It just gets stronger as it sits in the brine. Here you can see I'm starting to gather my milk, and here's a list of what you will need to make this. You're going to need about 3 gallons of goat milk, or you can use cow's milk if that's what you have, and then of course you're going to need a pot that will hold those 3 gallons of milk. A long slotted spoon and a cheese knife, or just a really long knife, a mesophilic culture, calf lipase, liquid rennet. You could use other rennet. I use liquid. And kosher salt, and then a either big jar or other kind of container for the brining. You probably are also going to want a thermometer of some sort because you will have to get things to a certain temperature and keep them there during this process. So I am getting all my milk here. 3 gallons is a bunch of smaller jars from my fridge. And once I have 3 gallons in my pot, I am going to bring this milk up to 86 degrees. If you're working with cow's milk, then you want to bring it up to 88 degrees. There's my big slotted spoon so I can keep it stirred up, and I'm just going to get it up to temperature. I will say here, I brought this recipe from, I used a recipe from Fiasco Farm, and I will put a link to Fiasco Farm's website in the description. Fiasco Farm is a great website to find information about goat care in general, and they lean towards a more natural or herbal perspective of care. And so if you want information on that or other cheese recipes, you should look them up and check out their site. So we're just going to continue to get this cheese up to temperature. I should also note that you definitely should sterilize all your equipment before you start. I did not show that part of the process, but just a little bit of bleach and water and you're good. That's just to make sure you don't have any bacteria that you don't want growing in your cheese. So once I have this up to the correct temperature, again 86 for goat milk, 88 for cow's milk, I'm going to go ahead and add my culture. I use an culture, and I will put a link in the description to the type of culture that I use. I'm using 1/4 teaspoon of that culture. Here you can also do this with buttermilk. It's a similar thing. I have not done it that way. I like to use the freeze-dried cultures. So 1/4 teaspoon of culture, and then I'm also going to be adding 1/4 teaspoon of calf lipase. Lipase, it gives it a stronger flavor, and feta is a very strong flavored cheese. If you are vegetarian, then you do not want to add your calf lipase because this is not a vegetarian ingredient. Everything else I'm using today is, so this is the only thing that you would have to omit. So again, 1/4 teaspoon of the calf lipase as well. You could add up to 1/2 teaspoon if you want it really strong. I'm good with the 1/4 teaspoon. You're going to stir this really well. Make sure that the culture and the lipase are well incorporated. I like to stir back and forth and then also up and down through the culture or through the milk so that it all gets incorporated. Then you're going to cover this and you're going to let it sit for 1 hour. All right, coming back to the milk after 1 hour, it should look pretty much the same as when you left it, and it should be right about the same temperature. It takes a while for that quantity of milk to go down. We're going to add our rennet. This is the type I use. Again, I'll leave a link in the comments. Not the comments, the description. I'm using double strength liquid rennet, so I need 1/2 teaspoon of the rennet. I'm dissolving it in 1/2 cup of water. If you have regular strength liquid rennet, you're going to use a full teaspoon. You can still dissolve it in 1/2 cup of water. If you're using tablets, you'll just need to make the conversion to whatever that equals. I always use liquid, so I don't know. You're going to stir that up. I stir kind of gently, more lifting up and down through it with a little bit of a stir until I'm reasonably sure that the rennet is completely through it. Once I am, I'm going to go ahead and take that out. I'm going to put the lid on and I'm going to leave this for about 45 minutes. After 30 to 45 minutes, I'm going to check for what's called a clean break. Once you've seen it, you know it. This is my cheese knife. You basically are making a slice, and then you're seeing that the slice stays there and the inside of it fills in with whey. You should be able to see that it's still there. And so then I'm going to go ahead and cut my curds. The process used to cut the curds is first I'm going up and down across, leaving 1/2 inch slices. Please excuse my sniffles. My allergies are bothering me today. So up and down, 1/2 inch slices across the entire surface of the cheese. If you find that it's not cutting, if it's breaking, then you need to give it longer to set up. All right, once I've gone all the way across, then you need to turn it a 1/4 turn so that now you can do 1/2 inch slices up and down again, but they're going to be perpendicular to the first slices that you made. So you're basically making a checkerboard kind of thing across the whole surface. And I'm just holding the knife straight up and down. Then hold your knife at a 45-degree angle and cut slices that go diagonal across. Then give it a 1/4 turn and do the same thing, diagonal across. Then another 1/4 turn and diagonal across. And another 1/4 turn and diagonal across. Do not stir the curds at this time. You're going to let it sit for 10 minutes and then you're going to come back to it. After 10 minutes is passed, it's time to stir the curds. And you want to do this kind of gently, lifting them from the bottom and kind of shaking a little bit to move them. They're still kind of fragile. This first stir, as you see any larger chunks that didn't get cut well the first time, you can go ahead and just use the spoon or your cheese knife if you wish to kind of break up those larger pieces so that you have roughly 1/2 inch chunks. Don't be OCD about them all being the same size or anything. It's just, you want them about the same size. Also, you want to keep them at that 86-degree mark, or 88 if you're using cow milk. And so I'm checking the temperature here, and it had dropped about 1 degree. So I went ahead and brought it back up to 86 degrees. Now you're going to leave it at that 86 degrees for the next 45 minutes. And about every 10 minutes, you want to come back and stir the curd just like you just did, because you want to try to keep it from sticking together. So just gently bring the curd up from the top, separate the curds a little bit, but be careful not to smash the curd or to really viciously stir it. You just kind of want to keep it from sticking too much. You'll find with each stir, the curds release more whey and they get a little less fluffy looking and they firm up a bit. So 45 minutes, stirring every 10 minutes. All right, 45 minutes have passed, and if you look at the curds now, you can see that they no longer look like poofy and shiny. They have a little bit more of a tighter appearance here. That means they are ready to be pulled out of the way and poured into a cheesecloth. You can see here that I've lined my colander with cheesecloth. That's something I forgot to put on the list of materials you need. You're going to need a colander and cheesecloth. And this is a fine cheesecloth. It's sold by like a cheese making company. The stuff you find in the grocery store is not really appropriate for actual cheese making. And I'm using a double layer, basically one larger piece that's folded in half to line the colander. And if you make it a little bit wet, then it will kind of stick to the sides of the colander and stay in place better. I'm scooping out my curds. I could pour them in here, but they tend to splash and make a bit of a mess. So scooping out the beginnings of it. Now, if you want to use the whey to make ricotta afterwards, then you would want to put your colander above a larger bowl to catch the whey. Personally, I wasn't going to be making ricotta this time. I didn't need it for anything, had an overflow of cheese at the moment. So I'm just going to pour my ricotta. If you have pigs or any other creatures that might like the whey, it does have nutrients in it. It can also be used for making bread. It does have some uses. So some of you may cringe as I'm about to pour it down the drain. But I make a lot of cheese and I have a lot of whey. So I'm going to pour this out and I am going to get all the curds into the colander with the cheesecloth. At this point, I'm going to tie the four corners together, or basically to tie opposite corners together. And then I'm going to hang the cheese by that tie. Once you hang your cheese, and you just need somewhere that you can hang it so that it's hanging by its own weight, and you put a bowl under it to catch the drippings. Once you've hung it, you want to hang it for about 3 to 4 hours to start with. After 3 to 4 hours, I'm going to take the cheese down and I'm going to just basically untie it and turn it over in there so that the top right now, which is sort of bumpy, will get made into the bottom and that'll smooth it out. If you forget to do this, it's not really a big deal. It just sort of makes a nicer looking cheese. And then once I've put it back in there, now I'm going to hang it for 24 hours. You will need to to empty out the little bowl a couple of times, especially during that first 3 hours, because there's going to be a lot of whey draining out. Not as much later on. But now I'm going to let it hang for 24 hours. And it will start to emit a certain odor. You may want to tell everybody around you, okay, this is cheese. It's going to smell like cheese. Just so you know, there's cheese here. Because they might walk around the kitchen going, what's that smell? I smell something. It smells weird. What is it? And so just be aware that could happen. So hang it up, leave it alone for 24 hours. After your 24 hours have passed, now it's time to cut the cheese into usable blocks. You're going to need your kosher salt at this point. You're also going to need a container that will fit all of these blocks in it. I use a big Tupperware container. So I'm going to pull my cheese out here, and the chunks that I'm going to cut it into are maybe 3 inches across, something like that. I have a couple little fruit flies that are weird and hanging out here. That happens. All right. So don't forget your cheesecloth. That's not disposable. You wash that and you can use it again. It'll be totally fine. Sometimes I get a little bit of cheesecloth bits on it or whatever, and I'll pick that off at this point. All right, so I'm going to get some kosher salt and I'm going to pour it in this plate beside my cheese. And I'm essentially going to coat my cheese, all the sides of the cheese, in kosher salt liberally. Okay, the kosher salt will help to pull more moisture out of the cheese, but it also keeps any mold from developing on your cheese. So you want to make sure you liberally coat it with kosher salt. And I will speed up the process of cutting this cheese after the first slice, but you can see basically I've just got chunks about this size, and I'm going to take them and dip all the sides in kosher salt, and then I'm going to put them in a separate container. Once you have cut them all and gotten them into a container, you're going to let that container sit at room temperature for 2 to 3 days. Yes, 2 to 3 days. It needs to sit out. The blocks need to continue to harden and to release whey. If I see it whey sitting in the bottom of the container during that time, then I'll open it and I'll pour out the extra whey because I feel like that helps them to harden up better. So 2 to 3 days of sitting at room temperature, thoroughly salted. If you see any mold begin to develop on the cheese, that usually means you did not put enough salt on. And you don't have to dispose of that though. Just wipe off the mold and resalt the piece and put it back in, and it'll be totally fine. So let it sit for 2 to 3 days, and then you're going to put it into its brine. After 3 days, you're going to need to make your brine. This is simply done by taking half a cup of kosher salt and dissolving it in half a gallon of water. And I'm going to bring that water to a boil because it won't dissolve unless it's brought to a boil. And by bringing the water to a boil, it's going to make sure that I've killed any possible bacteria or anything that might be in the water. Once I've brought it to a boil, I'm going to pour it into the jar that I'm going to brine the cheese in. For that, I use a 1-gallon pickle jar. If you have pretty much a 1-gallon, any jar will work for this, but there is a kosher pickle jar that is the perfect size, and I use these 1-gallon jars to hold milk and to do other things with too. It's a very convenient jar to have around. So bring it to a boil, make sure the salt is completely dissolved, and then pour that into your pickle jar. And then you're going to want to let that brine come back to room temperature before you put your cheese into it. That is important. You want to give it a few hours so that it's back at room temperature. Do not put your cheese into hot brine. That would be a bad plan. All right. Be back in a few. Once the brine is cool, you're simply going to load your cheese into the brine, and once it's in there, try to get it so that all of the cheese is under the brine, and then you're going to put it in the refrigerator. It's going to sit in the refrigerator for at least a month. All right, after a month, you can use it, and it'll be good, and you can leave it a year or more. I have done, and it's been perfectly fine. A few troubleshooting notes. If you notice that your brine develops a little bit of mold across the top of the brine, that is okay. It doesn't usually happen in a month, but sometimes it happens after some time has gone by. All you need to do is skim that mold off, and it shouldn't affect the cheese. If it's actually on the cheese, not just floating on the brine, you're going to want to take that piece of cheese out, clean it off, just kind of wipe it off with a paper towel, and then make sure that it's fully submerged in the brine when you're done. As long as it stays fully submerged, you generally don't have the problem of mold developing on it. If your cheese gets soft after you put it in the brine, then you may have put it in too early. Usually 3 days is enough to harden it up, but if it starts to get soft and you notice it breaking apart, then take it out of the brine, give it some more time to harden, and then put it back in. But usually that isn't a problem. So leave it for a month, and then I will show you what you do when your month is up. Now for me, I'm pulling out a different batch that's been curing for a month so that I didn't have to wait quite as long to show you the final process here. So what I'm going to do now is with the cured feta, I'm going to pull out some of the pieces and I'm going to dry them off on a clean paper towel. I just want to dry off the brine from them so that I don't have wet feta that I'm putting in my little containers. Now, when you've gotten feta from the store, it's probably been very dry and almost like powdery on the outside. And you're gonna find that this doesn't turn out quite like that, and it doesn't crumble as much as that type of feta does. So what I do instead of trying to crumble it is I basically dice it. So I'm just gonna take my feta here and I am going to dice the pieces that I've got. And so you just are dicing it up, and I'm putting it in little containers to sell. They will crumble some as you're cutting. You'll see that some of the pieces just sort of crumble apart, but the dicing it is the main breaking up of it. It's just much faster and easier for me than the trying to make it crumble. Make sure you taste some, make sure it's good, and only cut up enough to use at, within maybe 1 to 2 weeks. If it sits in your fridge longer than 1 to 2 weeks, it's probably going to mold. So just take out what you're going to use in a short period of time. The feta that's in the brine, that stuff can just stay there for I'm not really sure what the limit is on that. I've had it in there more than a year, and it's still been perfectly fine. It does develop a stronger flavor over time, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and it lasts for a very long time, which is what makes it one of my favorite cheeses, because you just don't have to use it quite so quickly. It has a nice long lifespan, whereas a lot of cheeses you have to use them pretty fast or else they will start to mold. So this is how you make feta. If you have more questions for me, please go ahead and comment and I will respond. And if you need links to any of the cultures or to the Fiasco Farm website, please check out the description. And please like, share, and comment. And thanks for watching, and I hope that if you make this feta that you enjoy it as much as I do. Have a great day. Oh, one more thing. If you're interested in our farm, we make goat milk soap at www.uttergracesoaps.com, and you can check that out if you are interested.